All right, class. Sergio Silva Jr. here, doing week eight's discussion board, going into option two. This is on ADHD. So, starting off with the neuropsychology of ADHD, there are a multitude of different hypotheses on why ADHD leads to these impulse control issues and lack of attention, inability to concentrate, these kind of hallmark symptoms of ADHD. One of the leading hypotheses is one of the most widely accepted is the low dopamine hypothesis rather, and that's essentially saying that a very low amount of dopamine in the brain, stemming from the reward system or the mesolimbic system, um, not shooting really too much dopamine out into the rest of the brain, kind of causes the brain to go into haywire and panic and really search desperately for dopamine everywhere. And you see this in kind of the hyperactivity. So it's not necessarily, I would think without studying any of this that you have way too much dopamine and you're just, flying all over the place. But it's really this desperate desire or need, almost a biological need to find dopamine, find pleasure, find reward. Dopamine isn't necessarily associated with just pleasure and reward. It's associated with movement. You see this in Parkinson's, and it's associated with anticipation of reward, with interest, with so many different things. But another really important brain region to talk about here is the default mode network. And the default mode network is a network of a multitude of different brain regions working simultaneously together during introspection and during kind of wandering, if you will. And there's another part of the brain that once the default mode network kind of quiets down and you have a task or a particular direction that you're moving in, a goal-oriented behavior, that network of the brain, task-oriented network, kind of takes charge. And there's atypical functioning in these networks and the the working together of these networks in individuals with ADHD. These lack harmony. They don't switch on and off appropriately, and they even fire at the same time. So it really kind of gets in the way of switching from introspection and then switching appropriately and efficiently to goal oriented behavior. And so you have this kind of daydreamy like approach to tasks. And so you have those hallmark symptoms, like I mentioned before, of starting 1.5 million tasks and not really completing any of them, and just kind of overthinking so many different things and having a really difficult time to commit to them and to finish them or to concentrate on one particular thing at all. So how does stimulants affect the neurochemistry in order to treat ADHD symptoms? The two main medications used are amphetamines and methylphenidates. Amphetamines, the main mechanism of action, there's a lot of different ones, but the main one is kind of inhibiting the synaptic vesicles. My understanding is inhibiting the synaptic vesicles to store dopamine in their little sacs, if we remember that from a few weeks ago. And so this leaves a bunch of dopamine floating around in the neurons, in the presynaptic neurons, leading to more release of dopamine naturally. In addition to inhibition of monooxidase inhibitors and basically the cleaning up of dopamine, so on and so forth. And methylphenidate, you actually have a little more, I understood a little more of a specific mechanism of action where it was strikingly similar to SSRI, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. They bind to those receptor sites and inhibit the reuptake of dopamine, leaving more dopamine to accumulate in the synaptic cleft, allowing for more successful binding of dopamine to the postsynaptic neuron. So, what are the benefits of treating ADHD in children with medication, particularly in respect to them meeting their developmental milestones? ADHD can be so distressing to anyone, particularly a child in a school system where there's regimented rule sets and homework and a expectation to pay attention for extended periods of time. So you can have conduct control or conduct issues stemming from an inability to control their impulses, inability to concentrate, information just kind of going over their head, and forgetting to complete assignments. So many things that can not just simply prevent them from learning and developing their brains, but also not not succeeding and not doing the enough work to move on to different grades, and it can really just interrupt their ability to learn, and their ability to connect to society. And yeah, so the next one is elaborate on how to properly educate parents on the use of stimulants and non-stimulant medications to treat their symptoms. So here you would have a very collaborative approach to this. You would really talk about what would all the treatment look like? What would psychotherapy do alongside these medications? What are some of the side effects that can happen? What are all the different options here? What's the evidence? What's the evidence? What's the research like? And similar to how I'm going to answer this, the last point is find the language of your client, find the language of the family, and really engage in the learning experience with them. And check your bias at the door, whether that takes talking to supervisors or your colleagues. Get rid of your perspectives and bring in the family's goals, make sure it's ethical, make sure it's okay for you to abide by, and learn alongside them, teach alongside them. And describing how to ethically and respectfully navigate situations where parents don't really want to go the medication route, and maybe they want to use holistic approaches similar to the ones we were talking about the last couple weeks, or non-FDA approved stimulants. Let them know, again, collaboratively, bring in research articles and talk about the limitations of these, talk about the research that has been done, talk about what other side effects they might experience, talk about how these might tackle X, Y, and Z, but they might not tackle the impulse control, for instance, or they might not be as strong. Talk about brain mechanisms if your client system is interested in going that deep. So again, do it collaboratively, find the language of your client, and go through all the different steps of what treatment could look like with X, what it could look like with Y, and everything associated to what it would look like. All right, thanks for watching.